If someone you loved more than anyone else left you one final letter, a letter they made you promise never to open until after they were gone, would you read it? Or would you spend the rest of your life wondering if some truths are simply too painful to uncover? Every year, millions of people gather around caskets believing they are saying their final goodbye. Flowers are placed beside polished wood. Tears fall. Memories are shared. Families hug one another, trying to accept that a chapter has finally come to an end. But every once in a while, a funeral does not close a story. It quietly opens one that no one ever imagined. And when that happens, every memory, every smile, and every promise suddenly carries a completely different meaning. This is the story of a man who believed he had buried the love of his life. A husband who thought he knew every dream his wife ever chased, every fear she ever carried, and every secret she had ever trusted him with. For nearly 12 years, Daniel Carter believed his marriage was built on complete honesty. Friends admired the way he looked at his wife. Neighbors often joked that they were the kind of couple Hollywood could never accurately portray because their love seemed too genuine to be written into a script. Yet 3 days after standing beside her grave, Daniel would discover that the woman he loved had spent years protecting a truth so powerful that it would change the meaning of their entire relationship. It was not a story of betrayal in the way people usually imagine. It was something far more heartbreaking, and once Daniel unfolded a single piece of paper, there was no way to return to the life he thought he had lived. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories involving letters discovered after a loved one's death have appeared throughout American history. Historians, journalists, and family researchers have documented countless cases in which journals, sealed envelopes, forgotten photographs, military records, adoption documents, and personal diaries completely changed the way surviving relatives understood the people they thought they knew best. Sometimes those discoveries revealed forgotten acts of courage. Sometimes they uncovered painful sacrifices. And sometimes they reunited families that had spent decades believing they would never find one another again. While the names and identifying details in today's story have been changed to protect privacy, the emotional journey you are about to hear is inspired by documented events and real accounts shared by families whose lives were transformed by secrets revealed only after death. It began on an unusually quiet Saturday morning in the small American town of Ashford Ridge. The streets were lined with maple trees that had started shedding their leaves, and a cold breeze drifted through the cemetery where hundreds of people stood dressed in black. Teachers from the elementary school, former students, lifelong friends, neighbors, church members, and relatives gathered shoulder to shoulder, united by grief. At the center of it all rested the white casket of Emma Carter, a beloved elementary school teacher remembered for her patience, kindness, and unwavering belief that every child deserved to feel important. Parents often said Emma had changed their children's lives without ever asking for recognition. To the town, she represented compassion. To Daniel Carter, she represented home. Daniel stood motionless beside the casket. His eyes were fixed on the polished wood as though refusing to look away would somehow keep Emma close for a few moments longer. He barely noticed the comforting hands placed on his shoulders or the quiet voices offering condolences. His mind replayed countless ordinary memories that now felt priceless. Morning coffee together before work, evening walks through the neighborhood, weekend road trips with no destination except wherever the highway happened to lead them. 12 years of marriage had taught him that love was rarely found in dramatic moments. It was found in routines, shared laughter, silent understanding, and the comfort of simply knowing someone would always be there when the day came to an end. Now that certainty had disappeared, leaving behind a silence that no words could fill, the funeral ended just before sunset. Friends returned to their homes. Family members promised to check on Daniel during the coming weeks. Flowers slowly covered the fresh soil beneath Emma's headstone. As darkness settled over the cemetery, Daniel whispered one final goodbye before walking away with the painful belief that every unanswered question had been buried alongside the woman he loved. He had no reason to think otherwise. Emma had always been honest, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to their marriage. If she had ever carried burdens, Daniel believed they had carried them together. At least, that was what he told himself as he drove home to an empty house, where every room still carried the quiet echoes of Emma's presence. 3 days later, just after 9 o'clock in the morning, someone knocked on Daniel's front door. Standing outside was a middle-aged attorney dressed in a dark gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. Daniel assumed there must be paperwork connected to Emma's estate, insurance documents, or legal forms requiring his signature. Instead, the attorney reached into the briefcase and carefully removed a small cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. The handwriting on the front immediately caught Daniel's attention because he recognized it without hesitation. It belonged to Emma. Across the center of the envelope were 6 words written in careful, steady handwriting. "Open this only after my funeral." Daniel's hands began to shake. The attorney quietly explained that Emma had delivered the envelope to his office nearly 4 years earlier with strict instructions that it should never be given to anyone unless she had passed away. She had renewed those instructions every year without offering any explanation. She simply insisted that the envelope remain sealed until after her funeral. Then the attorney offered his condolences, wished Daniel strength, and walked back toward his car, leaving one simple envelope resting in the hands of a man whose world was about to change forever. Daniel stared at the letter for several minutes before gathering the courage to break the seal. Inside was a handwritten note several pages long. The first sentence immediately stole the air from his lungs. "If you're reading this, my greatest fear has finally come true. I ran out of time before I found the courage to tell you everything." At that moment, Daniel realized this was not simply a farewell letter. It was the beginning of a story he had never known existed. Every memory he treasured suddenly felt incomplete. Every conversation with Emma echoed differently inside his mind. Why had she waited until after her death to reveal the truth? What secret could possibly require years of silence? And why would the woman who loved him so deeply believe that the only safe time to tell him was after she was gone? By the time Daniel reached the bottom of the first page, he understood only one thing with absolute certainty. The love story he believed had ended at the cemetery was only just beginning. And what he would discover over the coming days would force him to question everything he thought he knew about the woman he had loved with all his heart. To everyone who knew them, Daniel and Emma Carter represented the kind of marriage people hoped still existed. Daniel, a 38-year-old architect, was admired not because he chased attention, but because he quietly improved the lives of everyone around him. Emma, 36, had become one of the most beloved teachers in Ashford Ridge, remembered by generations of students for her warmth, patience, and ability to make every child feel seen. They laughed together, volunteered together, celebrated every anniversary in the same little lakeside town, and rarely spent a day apart. Neighbors described them as inseparable, while family members often smiled and called them soulmates. Even Daniel believed there were no hidden chapters left in Emma's life. But looking back, there were details he had never questioned. Every October, Emma insisted on taking a quiet trip alone, always returning with tired eyes and a gentle smile that revealed nothing. Whenever Daniel asked about her college years, she would softly change the subject without explanation. And in the corner of their bedroom sat an old wooden box that remained locked for 11 years. Daniel had respected her privacy, believing everyone deserved a few personal keepsakes. He never asked for the key because he trusted her completely. Only after Emma's funeral did those forgotten moments begin fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. Daniel had no idea that the locked wooden box, untouched for more than a decade, contained the first clue to a promise Emma had been preparing him to uncover all along. A promise that would forever change the meaning of the life they had shared together. Years before that mysterious letter arrived at Daniel's door, their story had begun in the most unexpected way. A devastating flood had swept through several neighborhoods outside Ashford Ridge, leaving countless families struggling to rebuild their homes. Like many volunteers, Daniel Carter spent his weekends helping complete strangers recover from the disaster. That was where he first met Emma Carter. She was organizing donated supplies for displaced families, greeting every exhausted volunteer with the same reassuring smile that would later become impossible for Daniel to forget. What began as casual conversations over long days of hard work slowly turned into dinners, weekend walks, and late-night phone calls that lasted until sunrise. Their connection felt effortless, built on kindness, trust, and shared dreams of creating a peaceful life together. They married a few years later, bought a modest little home they proudly renovated room by room, and often talked about the day they would fill it with children. To everyone around them, they were building exactly the future they had always imagined. But as the years passed, Daniel noticed quiet moments that never quite made sense. Emma often stayed awake long after midnight, writing letters she never allowed him to read. She carefully organized old photographs inside envelopes, returning them to the same drawer every time. On more than one occasion, Daniel found her sitting alone with a faded postcard in her hands, tears quietly running down her face. Whenever he gently asked what was wrong, Emma would wipe away her tears, force a small smile, and softly reply, "I'll explain one day." Then, one evening, Daniel walked into their home office without knocking and caught a glimpse of an unfinished letter lying on her desk. The moment Emma realized he had seen it, she quickly folded the pages, slipped them into an envelope, and locked them away without saying a word. Daniel chose not to press her, believing love also meant respecting silence. But one question had quietly begun waiting for its answer. Who was Emma writing to all those years? Daniel Carter searched through every part of the home he and Emma had shared. Determined to understand the truth, she could no longer explain herself. Inside the old wooden box, he found worn journals, train tickets dating back nearly 20 years, carefully folded newspaper clippings, and a birth certificate with several names deliberately blacked out. Instead of answering his questions, each discovery raised even more. Following a few handwritten notes hidden inside one of Emma's journals, Daniel eventually located an elderly retired nurse living several states away. The moment she saw Emma's photograph, her eyes filled with tears. After a long silence, she quietly whispered, "I promised I'd never tell anyone." But when Daniel told her that Emma had passed away, she realized the promise had reached its end. With a heavy heart, she revealed that years before Emma had ever met Daniel, she had given birth while still in college. Shortly afterward, a devastating accident claimed both of Emma's parents, leaving her completely alone and unable to care for her newborn son. Through unimaginable heartbreak, the child was placed for adoption. The nurse explained that Emma never stopped loving him and never stopped searching for him. She had kept the secret from Daniel, not because she doubted his love, but because she feared reopening the deepest wound of her life and burdening the man she treasured most. As every piece finally began falling into place, Daniel remembered the mysterious trips Emma took every October. She had never been walking away from her husband. She had been quietly searching for the son she prayed she would one day find. The final pages of Emma's letter contained one last clue, an address she had visited countless times but never had the courage to approach. Refusing to let her search end with her passing, Daniel Carter followed every lead until it brought him face to face with a man named Michael Brooks. By then, Michael was an adult, living an ordinary life, completely unaware that the answers to his own past were standing on his doorstep. Daniel introduced himself with a trembling voice and carefully handed him the letter Emma had written with so much love and regret. As Michael slowly read each page, silence filled the room. The woman he had spent a lifetime wondering about had never abandoned him in her heart. She had searched for him for years, carrying the hope that one day they might meet. Tears filled both men's eyes as they reached Emma's final words together. "If fate ever brings you together, don't let my absence keep you apart." In that moment, Daniel understood that Emma's greatest wish had never been to protect her own memory. She wanted the two most important people in her life to become family. Instead of losing his wife all over again, Daniel discovered the son she had loved from a distance for decades. The funeral everyone believed had marked the end of Emma Carter's story became the beginning of the family she had dreamed about for the rest of her life, but never lived long enough to see reunited. Some people leave behind wealth that eventually fades away. Some leave behind photographs that slowly lose their color with time. Others leave behind stories that are passed from one generation to the next. But Emma Carter left behind something far more valuable. She left behind healing. One handwritten letter reunited two people whose lives had always been connected by love, even though they had never truly known each other. Daniel Carter began this journey believing he had lost everything the day he stood beside Emma's grave. Instead, by honoring her final wish, he discovered that love can continue its work long after the person who shared it is gone. Emma's greatest gift was not the secret she kept, but the family she brought together in the end. Perhaps the deepest expression of love is not holding on forever. Perhaps it is making sure the people you cherish find one another, even when you are no longer there to guide them. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you discovered a letter after losing someone you loved, would you want to know every hidden truth? Or do you believe some secrets are better left buried forever? Share your answer in the comments below because your perspective could inspire someone else. And if this story touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to Unspoken Stories for more emotional mysteries, unforgettable true-to-life storytelling inspired by real events, and powerful endings that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.